When you hear the words Iwo Jima, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For almost everyone, it's that iconic photograph, right? U.S. Marines straining together to raise the American flag on Mount Suribachi. It's an image of pure, hard-won victory. But today, we're going to do something different. We're going to turn away from that flag. We're going to go deep inside the island itself, into the miles of tunnels dug from black volcanic rock, to understand the battle from the perspective of the man who designed it all. A man who knew, before a single shot was fired, that he was authoring a blueprint for his own defeat. Just let that sink in for a moment. This was written in a letter to his wife, Yoshi, in November of 1944. The American invasion was still 3 months away. This isn't the bold promise of a general on the eve of battle. It's the chilling, brutally honest confession of a man who has already accepted his own death. This one sentence tells you everything you need to know about the mission given to Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. It was never, ever about winning. It was about making the cost of victory so high, it would scar the soul of his enemy.
So imagine it's June 1944. General Kuribayashi steps off a transport and sets foot on Iwo Jima for the first time. What does he see? Not a tropical paradise. He sees 8 square miles of black volcanic ash, jagged rocks, and vents hissing sulfuric steam. It's a desolate, primordial landscape. And his orders from Prime Minister Tojo are crystal clear. Hold this island. Hold it to the last man, the last bullet. Kuribayashi, a pragmatist through and through, understood immediately. This wasn't a military assignment. It was a death sentence, written for him and the 21,000 men he was about to lead.
So why? Why all this fuss over a tiny, miserable piece of rock in the middle of the Pacific? Well, it was the definition of a strategic choke point. For Japan, it was a crucial, unsinkable aircraft carrier. Its radar stations gave Tokyo a 2-hour warning of incoming B-29 bomber raids, and its fighter planes could harass those bombers, forcing them to fly higher and drop their bombs less accurately. For the Americans, taking Iwo Jima was a game-changer. It would silence that early warning system, give their damaged bombers a place to land, and, this is the big one, provide a base for P-51 Mustang fighters to escort the B-29s all the way to Tokyo and back. For both sides, this island was the absolute key to the air war over Japan. Now here's where the story gets really fascinating. The man picked for this do-or-die mission was, ironically, one of the few Japanese generals who truly understood America. Kuribayashi wasn't your typical insulated military officer. He had spent 2 years in the U.S., from 1928 to 1930. He'd walked the halls of Harvard, traveled across the country, and he saw firsthand the sheer scale of America's industrial power. The car factories in Detroit, the endless resources. He saw it all and wrote home, warning that America was the very last country Japan should ever go to war with. Of course, back in Tokyo, this kind of clear-eyed realism got him branded a defeatist by the hardliners. But on Iwo Jima, that same unpopular realism would become his most dangerous weapon. He knew his enemy's strengths better than they knew them themselves. So what do? You're a realist. You've been handed an impossible mission on an unforgiving island against an enemy you know has overwhelming power. What do? Well, if you're Kuribayashi, you take the Japanese military doctrine, a century of tradition built on the Bushido Code, and you throw it right out the window. He knew the glorious banzai charge, the suicidal human wave attack, was just a theatrical way to die against American machine guns and artillery. So he decided to write a whole new playbook, a blueprint for a battle that wasn't based on honor, but on cold, brutal mathematics.
Let's just break down how radical this was. The old way, the traditional Japanese way, was to meet the enemy at the water's edge. You fight and die honorably on the beaches. Kuribayashi saw this as an absolute waste of life. His strategy was the exact opposite. Forget the beaches. He knew they'd be pounded into dust by the U.S. Navy. Instead, he would create a defense in death, letting the Americans come ashore and walk right into a perfectly designed kill box. And no more glorious banzai charges. Those were out. The new goal was maximum attrition. You don't die on the beach, you kill from inside a fortress. The objective shifted from dying for the emperor to making as many of the enemy die as possible.
His new rules of engagement were nothing short of heresy to many of his more traditional officers. First, he flat out forbade banzai charges, calling them suicide without purpose. Imagine the shock of hearing that. Second, he ordered the beaches to be abandoned. Let the Americans land. Let them think it's easy. His entire plan hinged on a massive engineering project and one single, terrifyingly simple directive for his 21,000 men. Victory wasn't the goal. Survival was out of the question. The mission was this: before you die, you must kill 10 Americans. Okay, so to make a strategy like that actually work, you can't just dig a few foxholes. You have to turn the entire island into a weapon. This wasn't just defense, it was one of the most incredible feats of military engineering in the entire war. A fortress built not on Iwo Jima, but inside of it. Just look at that number, 18 kilometers. That's over 11 miles of tunnels. 11 miles carved out of solid volcanic rock, almost entirely with hand tools, picks and shovels. This wasn't just a few tunnels, it was a subterranean city of death, a massive web connecting thousands of pillboxes, machine gun nests, artillery positions, command bunkers, and hospitals. It was all designed so his soldiers could fight, resupply, and reposition, completely hidden from the Americans, and almost totally safe from the naval bombardment they knew was coming. And you have to understand, building this fortress was its own private hell. The natural volcanic heat cooked the tunnels to over 50 degrees Celsius, that's 122 Fahrenheit. The air was thick with choking sulfur fumes that corroded everything. Fresh water was so scarce it had to be rationed by the capful. Men were dying from heat exhaustion and dysentery months before the battle even started, and through it all, Kuribayashi was right there with them. He refused any extra food or water, he slept on the same hard ground, he shared every single hardship, and in doing so, he earned a loyalty from his men that was absolute.
And it's important to remember, these weren't faceless soldiers. Among them was a man who was literally world famous, Colonel Baron Takeichi Nishi. He was a genuine aristocrat, a dashing equestrian who had won a gold medal for Japan in the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics. He was a celebrity who befriended Hollywood stars like Douglas Fairbanks and Charlie Chaplin. He understood America. He knew the war was hopeless. And yet here he was, duty-bound to this volcanic rock, bearing his prize tanks up to their turrets to be used as stationary pillboxes. It's just a heartbreaking symbol of how this war turned the entire world upside down.
For months, they dug, they suffered, and they waited. They endured what was, at the time, the longest and most intense pre-invasion bombardment of the entire Pacific War. For 74 straight days, American bombs and shells rained down on the island. And then, on the morning of February 19, 1945, the waiting finally ended. The invasion began. Kuribayashi's deadly blueprint was about to be tested, and a 36-day hell was about to be unleashed. What happened next was terrifyingly precise, like clockwork. Step 1. Patience. As thousands of shells hit the island, the Japanese defenders just waited silently in their underground fortress. Step 2. The lure. Kuribayashi held his fire. He watched as wave after wave of U.S. Marines landed, struggling through the incredibly soft volcanic ash that was like quicksand. He let them pile up on the beaches, 30,000 men packed together with absolutely no cover. And then, and only then, came step 3. Annihilation. The order was given. From hundreds of hidden, perfectly camouflaged positions, every gun on the island, all of which had been pre-sighted on every square inch of that beach, opened up at once. It was a storm of perfectly orchestrated fire. And that brings us back to that famous photograph. 4 days into this absolute inferno, a group of Marines fought their way to the top of Mount Suribachi and raised a small American flag. The photo we all know was actually taken hours later, of a second, much larger flag being raised. It was a huge morale boost, a powerful symbol of progress. But here's the critical thing that image can never show you. As those men raised that flag, thousands of Japanese soldiers were still alive and fighting in the miles of tunnels right beneath their feet. For them, the battle had barely begun. The symbol of victory on the surface meant nothing to the brutal war of attrition raging underground. The final price for taking that 8-square-mile island was just staggering. 6,821 Americans killed. Almost all of them were U.S. Marines. To give you some perspective, more Marines died in those 36 days on Iwo Jima than in the entire First World War. And for the Japanese defenders, the cost was exactly what Kuribayashi had known it would be, near total annihilation. Of the roughly 21,000 men charged with defending the island, it's estimated that 20,000 were killed. And yet this grim fact reveals just how brutally effective Kuribayashi's terrible blueprint was. If you look at total casualties, that's killed and wounded, Iwo Jima is unique. It was the only major battle in the entire Pacific War where the American casualties were higher than the Japanese. He couldn't win. He knew that from the start, but he absolutely fulfilled his promise to make the price of this island almost unbearable. The fighting on Iwo Jima eventually died down, but the story, the impact of this battle, was really just getting started. The shockwaves from this 36-day fight would travel halfway around the world, all the way to the White House, and would play a direct role in changing the final, terrible endgame of World War II.
Let's follow these shockwaves. The island was declared secure in March 1945, though unbelievably, the last 2 Japanese soldiers didn't surrender until January 1949. But the most crucial connection is to August of 1945. American war planners in Washington looked at the 26,000 American casualties on Iwo Jima, and they asked themselves a terrifying question. If it cost us this much blood to take one tiny 8-square-mile volcanic island, what in God's name will it cost to invade the home islands of Japan? The projections were for 1 million American casualties and many millions more Japanese. And those horrifying numbers born directly from the ash of Iwo Jima became a powerful, perhaps decisive argument in the decision to use the atomic bomb.
So when you boil it all down, the legacy of this one battle is just immense and complex. Strategically, the island proved its worth. Over 2,000 damaged B-29s made emergency landings there, saving the lives of nearly 25,000 American airmen. Militarily, Kuribayashi's tactics were studied for decades and influenced tunnel warfare in places like Korea and Vietnam. Politically, as we've seen, its horrific casualty rate shaped the very end of the war. And culturally, it became this revered symbol of heroism in America, while in Japan, for many decades, it was just a forgotten tragedy, a painful memory among so many others.
In the end, we have to go back to the man who designed this brutal masterpiece. General Kuribayashi's body was never found. It's believed he died leading one last desperate charge on March 26th. But his final letters home didn't speak of imperial glory or honor. They spoke of his children. He wrote that he believed this hopeless suicidal stand could buy just one more day of safety for his family back home. That was it. That was the core motivation that sustained him and his men through a hell that they both created and endured.
And this leaves us with a very difficult question, one without an easy answer. General Kuribayashi was, without a doubt, a military genius. His defensive blueprint was revolutionary. It worked exactly as he designed it, not to win, but to inflict unimaginable pain. But all of that brilliance, all of that dedication, was in service of a cause that was already lost. So how do we remember a man like that? Is he a patriot defending his home, a monster who designed a killing machine, a tragic genius? Maybe the truth is he was all of those things at once. A complex, contradictory figure, forever entombed in the volcanic ash of an island that serves as a timeless monument to the terrible, terrible price of war.